Hello, my name is Paul Giarmini, and I'm going to do a deep dive on my video called the Anarchy. Let's get into it. What's the schedule here? Brief discussion of who I am, in case you don't know. Shot by shot breakdown. We're going to look at some of the sort of historical and contemporary context I'm playing at with this video, and then I'll talk about my sources at the end. So, who am I? Student of history, anime fan, AMV creator since 2016, but most importantly, not an expert. Certainly think I'm going to present everything truthfully here, but you know, I'm not a learned or accredited or lettered professor, so your results may vary. So we start off the video with this picture of Little Boy. And Little Boy is one of two nuclear weapons employed by the US during the Second World War, and it's a gun-type fission bomb. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works. And its delivery method was the B-29 Superfortress. This is a war-winning heavy strategic bomber, and it actually cost the US more money to develop it than it did the atom bomb. And tons of fancy advanced technology in there, sort of fully pressurized so it could operate at a very high altitude, extremely difficult to intercept. It's also got these turrets, which you'll see on the top here, are actually controlled by a little guy sitting there, and there's a whole computer powering all that. Super advanced, definitely a very powerful tool in the arsenal. And it was used extensively in the air campaign against Japan. And I bring this up because the nuclear bombing of Japan is just sort of the final note of a long-running bombing campaign against Japan. This took place from 1944 to 1945. Overall objective of this was to destroy Japan's industrial and military capacity. Japan had sort of an interesting diffused industrial supply chain in that a lot of its industry was sort of spread out amongst its cities, in between residential buildings. That was one of the objectives. Second objective was, of course, wreck cities. You could term this as terror bombing. You're looking at around 241,000 to 900,000 killed as part of this campaign. There's a lot of factors as to why this campaign was so successful against Japan and less successful against the Axis in Europe. One of those factors was Japan's completely inadequate defense and their firefighting ability. And the man responsible for this is Curtis LeMay. He was part of the U.S. Army Air Force. He's in charge of the bombing campaign. Lots of great quotes from him, but I think the most telling is, "I'll tell you what war is about. You've got to kill people, and when you've killed enough, they stop fighting." That idea sort of permeated his whole theory of bombing against Japan, and he was quite successful in it. So we talked about the B-29. What's the actual plane that delivered the bomb? It's the Enola Gay. It's on display, so you can go actually visit it. In my video, there's a shot of just sort of the single solitary plane, but it was actually part of a three-plane bomber group. There were planes around to observe the bombing, take notes, sort of take scientific readings, if you will. And you'll also see in my video this bomb site. It's called the Norden bomb site. It's actually very accurate for the time. It could put a bomb in a 100-foot circle from where it was targeted to land. And, you know, it's not always achievable. Sort of that accuracy is from perfect conditions, and perfect conditions were hard to find a lot of the time. So it's less successful than Allied bomber planners thought it would be. But this sort of bomb site and the ability to deliver a lot of bombs, as we see in the B-29 and earlier bombers like the B-17 and the B-24, sort of informed the thinking of these heavy bombers are war-winning weapons. We can just destroy industry. The survey is still kind of out there. It's hard to say how truthful that is, but this technology certainly gave them a lot of confidence. We talked about Japan's inadequate firefighting ability. One of the other problems and what led to sort of these bombing campaigns being more effective was their heavy wood use in buildings. They've got a very dense population center, so a lot of wood in a dense packed area, inadequate firefighting is definitely leads to a high leads to very effective use against incendiary devices. So here from my video, you'll see the bomb delivery. That's August 6, 1945. You'll also see the bombardier here. He's got the Norden bomb sight, the Enola Gay. Here's the bomb being loaded. And I brought up Little Boy earlier, gun type fission bomb. So it's got this long tube in it, and there's uranium at one side of the tube and the other side of the tube. When the bomb goes off, that uranium is shot from one side to the other. They compress, that creates fission, and that releases a large amount of energy, creating the nuclear explosion we see. This is an airburst type weapon, which is why in my video you'll see the parachute deploy. It's meant to deploy about 2,000 feet above ground, and that ensures sort of maximum impact effects. Whereas if it were to detonate on the ground, some of that effect would be lessened. You'll see the bombing site in the video, and that's actually very close to what they would have seen that day. Their aiming target is this bridge, and there's a couple Japanese words in this. I am going to mess them up, but I'm going to go with Aoi Bridge. And so that was their target, and they ended up hitting pretty close to that. Not that it matters a whole ton with a nuclear weapon, but so this is an after attack image as well. You'll see this castle show up in the video. Obviously, Hiroshima is not Nagoya, but it's very close to a famous image from the Nagoya castle burning. So pretty sure that's why it's included. This source, of course, is Barefoot Gen. So attack results, you're looking at 90,000 to 166,000 killed. It's definitely very hard to figure out the total effect. Record keeping in Japan, 1945, obviously not very good. And while most of these deaths would result immediately, certainly over the preceding months there'd be additional follow-on deaths just because of the radiation exposure. And of course there are long-term cancer risks. You're looking at about 4.7 square miles destroyed, about 70% of all the buildings. And this gives rise to the hibakusha. That's my best shot at it. Sort of Japanese term for people who've survived these kinds of bombing. Not a lot of them left, but there are still a few survivors. You see this shot from my video. We'll talk a bit more about firestorms, but certainly all these wood buildings in the city would go up, and there'd be this great giant fire, so it's quite logical to think I need to escape the fire to jump in the river. And you saw earlier, right, there's all these rivers in Hiroshima, so it would make sense to take refuge in there, but there's so much heat as part of the firestorm that it's taking up all the oxygen, so most of these people would asphyxiate, or the water would heat up, they'd boil to death. There's definitely a big crush effect with so many people in the river. That's why you see this image in particular. And firestorms were definitely a tool utilized by the U.S. Air Force at the time. I'm indicating Operation Meeting House here from 1945, which is the bombing of Tokyo. You're looking at 105,000 killed during that event. And it's sort of a combination of everything we looked at. Japan's poor firefighting ability, the wooden cities, intensive use of incendiary weapons, sort of all culminates in Meeting House. And it does create a firestorm there, which is basically a just very big fire. You see this shot in the videos, both the before and after. This is the Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall, and it still exists today as the Hiroshima Peace Memorial. It's on the bridge they were targeting. It sort of got very lucky in that the explosion happened pretty much close to right above it. And so this building had very good compressive ability. So a lot of the brick structure to it did survive, despite it being at basically ground zero. I also covered the Nagasaki bombing, August 9th, 1945. Nagasaki was actually the second target they had planned for that day. They were going to attack Kokuro, but the weather wasn't good, so they diverted to their secondary target of Nagasaki. And if you'd like to see some interviews from people on that, you can check out my video on that, which is on my channel. We talked about Little Boy. The second type of bomb the U.S. used was Fat Man, which is an implosion type weapon. So Little Boy was a gun type where it shot uranium to compress it on the other end. This is an implosion type where there's an explosive ring which compresses uranium, which will cause a fission event and thus release a bunch of energy, causing a nuclear effect. Two different types of weapons they were experimenting with. And the delivery vehicle from that is also a B-29 called Boxcar. This is also on display at the U.S. Air Force Museum. I did visit it a couple years ago. It's quite interesting in person. If you're ever in Ohio, I'd recommend it. This clip from the video shows this friary. I'm not going to attempt that name, but it was a friary that existed in Nagasaki at the time. Franciscan, it's just a type of Catholic friary. And this source is from this anime, Nagasaki 1945. Highly recommend it. I use it extensively. Attack results, about 60 to 80,000 killed. You can see the before shot and the after shot. Nagasaki in particular has some mountain ranges which did afford some protection from the blast wave effects. And of course it was sort of not the primary target that day. So that is why you'll see sort of a lower casualty rate. Now as we move into the later half of the video, we'll talk about some of the more modern nuclear delivery systems. And the big idea you need to think of there is the nuclear triad. So in World War II, the delivery system was just heavy bombers. And nowadays, it's these three key parts which make the triad. So you still have these heavy bombers. When you also have, as this image shows, ground-based missiles. So those would be your intercontinental ballistic missiles that you could launch from your country to hit another country. And you also have these sea-based strategic missiles. So those are missiles launched from submarine. And the idea behind the triad is there's basically no one way to take out all of a country's nuclear weapons at one time. So you could certainly, in a surprise attack, take out your heavy bombers. And you might, if you're lucky, take out your missile silos. But it's next to impossible to take out your submarine-launched weapons. As part of the U.S. launch procedure, that in total can take about 5 minutes. So there's a man who goes around with the president at any time. If the president goes in an elevator, he has to be in that same elevator. And he's got this thing called the nuclear football. And we don't exactly know what's in the nuclear football, but from what we have gleaned, it's essentially radio communication, so the president can reach the powers that be at any time or place in the world. And there's also what's called the Black Book, which is referred to as basically like a Denny's menu of launch options. So in that Black Book, the president has sort of laid out all sorts of attack options from limited strikes to using the full arsenal, and he can launch submarine-based, ground-based, whatever the president determines the situation demands. And from there, he'll call in those launch orders, and then however the president wants to respond, ground-based, air-based, submarine-based, those orders then get carried out. And that whole process takes about 5 minutes. We see here from the video a nuclear missile silo. It takes about 1 minute for a well-trained crew to launch their missile. It's one-time use, so once you launch it, the silo is basically destroyed. Of course, the crew's fine, but this silo is never going to launch another missile. And on this map, you can see basically where the three main nuclear missile banks are in the U.S. This isn't quite a Minuteman III from the video, but it's very close. The Minuteman III is the U.S.'s current nuclear missile delivery system. Its range is about 8,700 miles, which is basically anywhere on Earth. There are a couple areas it won't hit, but essentially anywhere. Once it's launched, there's no abort system for it. So as soon as the missile operators turn their keys and launch the missile, there's no way to recall it. Here from the video, you can see these are called MIRs, multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles. So basically, each one of these is a nuclear weapon, and all of these are contained within the nose of the missile. So you target your missile to a general area, and then each one of these would be targeted to a location within that general area. Defense-wise, basically no real chance of defense. The U.S. does employ these ground-based mid-course defense missiles, and they have about 44 of them spread around. Their accuracy is about 50%, so a coin flip. And there's only 44 of them, so in sort of an all-out attack, they would be next to useless. One or two, you might get lucky. The missiles are traveling so fast, both these ground defense missiles and the attack missiles, they're essentially trying to hit a bullet with another bullet. So it's a very hard problem to solve, and that's why they're not a great defensive tool. And then we've got a section from the end. There's about 12,000 warheads out there, and from most to least, Russia, US, China, France, UK, India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea. Only about 2,100 on high alert, which means they're ready to launch, and they could hit that about 5-minute window of launch time. Any sort of launch would be likely to escalate. Sort of, they've war gamed out a lot of situations, and once you make an attack, it's pretty hard to de-escalate from an attack. So it's likely any nuclear attack would lead to a full-scale launch. And it's definitely hard to figure out what the butcher's bill would be in that case, but you're looking around 90 million dead in sort of a NATO versus Russia scenario. Obviously, sort of supply chain disruption. A nuclear winter might occur where there's so much ash thrown up in the sky that sort of the temperature of the Earth is reduced. There are EMP effects that might knock out a lot of electronics. Obviously, large spread famine, cancer for all the radiation results. There'd be massive firestorms everywhere. It's possible that this is an extinction level event. Certainly some countries that wouldn't be targeted would go on for longer. How those countries would be able to survive without sort of the global economy is questionable, but it's likely an extinction level event. And that's about it. For the World War II section, I definitely heavily relied on Whirlwind, the air war against Japan. I'd highly recommend that. For the modern discussion, I'd recommend Nuclear War, a scenario by Annie Jacobson. That's really good too. I think both of those together are all you really need. If you'd like to read more about Curtis LeMay and his bombing campaign, I'd recommend Black Snow. It's sitting on my bookshelf. I'll get to it sometime in the next 5 years. That's all I got. Hopefully I didn't say anything wrong. Talk to you later.